Okay, what I'd like to talk about a little bit, perhaps to generate further discussion, is the idea of citizenship, ICTs, and power relations. And a few of these ideas are based on a research project that we conducted, so an action research project that we conducted from 2011 to 2013, which was called Self-Defense IT. Migrant women defend themselves against. Self-Defense IT, migrant women defend themselves against violence in new media. It was an EU project, Daphne program, and it included countries, so Greece, Spain, Germany, England, and Austria. Austria was the carrier of the project, the project leader. It was based on two main parts. We had a research, which is action research, where questions were asked, but what we also did was we developed through the research, also developed a program in terms of actual concrete methods and measures to perhaps to benefit the target group, which were migrant women in Austria and in the Upper Austrian region, more or less in Linz. And the idea was, how could we support migrant women in the challenges faced, or in the challenges that they perhaps faced in supporting their children in the idea of new media, in the context of new media, the internet age, Web 2, and so on. The idea from this project came from our counseling services. Maiz is an autonomous migrant women's association. We have several services. We're involved in research, in cultural activities, in terms of political, cultural activities. We have courses in various forms, German courses, and also the high school leaving certificate. We offer preparation courses for youth, and we also have counseling services. And basically, the idea, the root idea came from the counseling services, where women were coming to us with often queries and problems concerning how could they handle situations with their children, high cell phone bills. They basically needed support in how they can handle these new problems. We thought different ways of approaching this. So there was also demand for technical skills. How can we offer support for technical skills? But also, what we wanted to do was also enter into a discourse. What does it mean? What does internet mean? And what does this whole digital age mean? And what is the relevance for their lives? Of course, there were a few key aspects how we approached this, and it was also through being a migrant women's organization in Austria, which has basically very racist structures and racist policies, restrictive policies towards migrants. Racism is a topic for us, as well as sexism and other forms of discrimination. And so what we decided to do, we had this research part, and through this research, trying to gain insight into what were the needs, what the women wanted, we also thought with this research we could also provide services, not just to treat these women as objects of research, but also to actually do something with the results, and to implement them into very concrete measures. And the measures that we took were, like I said, there were workshops, tutorials based on actual skill building. in terms of how can we upload pictures, emails, or what is safe internet, and what does that mean, and what is a position of migrant women in the internet, and what power structures are reproduced, what racisms or different forms of discrimination are reproduced in the internet. And then we also had a more discursive part, where many things were discussed. It wasn't just about transmitting information and skills, but also to think about and to either think about what strategies already exist and how what other strategies can be developed as a collective. And so also within this research part, there were many topics that were looked at from a migrant perspective, and what is the position of a migrant person in this whole idea of the democratization of internet and so on. I'd like to just read a couple of excerpts from the research report. And one excerpt talks about citizenship. Yeah? And of course, when we talk about the word citizenship, what do we talk about? We talk about this Staatsbürgerschaft, this official legal belonging to a country. However, when you talk about the subject of citizenship, then you're excluding a very large part of a section of society. People who have no papers, people who have no official legal status, people who don't have the right to vote, migrants, and who are totally excluded from the political democratic process in a country, in a nation. Just an idea, citizenship doesn't only refer to legal status, the right to vote, the learning of a language, or the inclusion in the labor market, but also the enactment of active and immediate acts of citizenship. This perspective includes the idea that marginalized groups can fight against the power relations they are suffering from. So in that sense, when we broaden the idea or broaden the concept of citizenship, there is, beyond the right to vote, the right to take part in the political process, there is perhaps a possibility, there is room for action. So, and taking a subjective role as opposed to passivity or as victimized role. The practices of marginalized groups and migrant women in particular in the context of ICTs form a further field of understanding the attainment of citizenship in unequal power relations. Basically, what we're looking at is a reproduction of the power relations that exist in regular society are basically reproduced in the internet or in the digital age, so to speak, perhaps even intensified. When we say, when we hear statements like everybody has access to internet, well, not everybody. Certain segments of society can't sign a contract. People who have no definite legal status, whose papers are in process, they are not in a position to sign a contract. And a contract means signing that would mean signing a contract with a provider to have internet access. So these people are automatically, because of their legal status, excluded from certain sections of what we call as mainstream, everybody has internet, everybody has access. That's a myth. Not everybody has access, and not everybody shares in this sector of what we call, sector of society. And so basically, so forms of exclusion in regular society are reproduced when we're talking about on another level within the context of the internet or ICTs. And so in this way, we create this connection between power relations and citizenship and ICTs. The discourse about the democratization powers of the digital age tends to be dominated by the impression that all that is needed to improve the democratic participation is a mobile phone or internet access. When we talk about e-governance as well, you need access, you need the devices and so on to be able to have certain access to certain sectors of society. So you made the comment before that to pay your taxes, the only possibility was e-governance. So e-governance. What happens when you don't have devices or the knowledge? Yeah. And also, when you're talking about the segment of society, many people use. There was also a statistic before, which showed 93% usage, but it was very specific in terms of companies in Turkey, and that's a very high usage rate. But also, where do a lot of people use computers and have access to technology is through work. Well, you have to look at what forms of work migrant women have access to. Migrant women, in general, the sectors of work in Austria are sex work, cleaning. Very few sectors of society or sectors of economic sectors or labor sectors where migrant women have access to. It's a very limited, the choices are very limited, and qualifications or to access to employment and qualified work is extremely limited. And when we're talking about qualified work, then we're talking about what does that mean? Access to internet, access to technology, computers, and so on. So also in work life, the possibilities are very, very, very small. The same discourse tends to blend out inequities and power differentials related to gender and class and are therefore made invisible through their exclusion. So again, when we say, yeah, everybody has, by not defining who everybody is, just mainstream society, we're excluding also many segments of society who are forgotten and who are often ignored. In fact, the digital divide itself may be yet another factor in the further marginalization of some sections of the population due to asymmetries of information, capital, and status. Yeah? So access to and the use of ICTs is also a question of power relations. That said, our experience in the workshops in many courses that we have, the migrant women who we often work with have certain knowledge and I wouldn't say there's no knowledge, have certain knowledge, and it's also very different. So also to say that migrant women have no knowledge is a misconception. Knowledge is there, access. I'm talking about access. So we need to differentiate between knowledge and access. But often the purpose, what a lot of this technology is used for, is not similar to the purpose what a lot of other people in the mainstream society use it for, which is perhaps work, finding a job, and so on. More transnational citizenship. So keeping in contact with family, reading newspapers from the home country, and so on, which is extremely important. Often in certain groups that I've worked with, also when a certain knowledge of certain technologies or certain programs are limited, Skype, email, and Facebook are the three main aspects. And yet now it's Viber. I don't know what that is yet. Are three main applications that are used, and that's because that's where the relevance is, keeping in contact with family members, or even surrogate parenting through the internet. So Skype, the parent works in one country, the children are in another country, and this effort to parent through Skype. In many cases, the migration process has influenced women to increase their use of ICTs and to participate in practices of transnational citizenship. ICTs offer a sort of techno-sociability that informs migration experience. Migrant women who are separated from their families use ITCs even more intensively. However, they represent a field of differential inclusion. Despite the celebration of the open character of the social web, ICTs reproduce power relations, hierarchies, and conflicts. Gender, social, and economic positions, job characteristics, expertise, education, and language affect the access and use of the web. What I'd like to, I think I'm going to keep it rather short, but what I'd like to, my wish would be to rethink what it is when we talk about citizenship. What is citizenship? And instead of only talking about democracy, how about we talk about participation? Who has access, or who has the possibility to participate in social, cultural, political life in a society? And to rethink when we're talking about our own projects, how can we perhaps restructure or take a step back and think about who is actually excluded and who has the privilege of being included. Yeah. That's all.
To clarify anything, if that's needed.
I know that we had a representative of the Red Cross here from Turkey. Have they gone, or are they still available? Okay, no, because the thing is that I'm a little bit involved with the Red Cross in Sweden, and an important part of their goal is to reunite families and to help families keep in contact while in exile or while being immigrant in different countries. So an interesting question here would be to know if the Red Cross here locally were working together with the excluded part to see if they could help them be included in the internet era and using internet as a way of communication with their friends and families from where they come from. But it's a shame that they're not here, so we can ask them those questions. Yeah, have you been in contact with the Red Cross?
No,
when it comes to
we don't work with the Red Cross directly, not as in a partnership or in a cooperation. We've found, so the women who are participants in our courses or workshops have their own strategies. So it's not so that directly in terms of reuniting hasn't been, to my knowledge, an issue at that point. Yeah. Because of course when an asylum seeker comes to Austria, they've been and finally comes to our services, or of course there's quite a large time span. So I don't know if that process has already been established. So the first finding, I can't really answer that. What I do know is that there is an amazing community and connection, and how they connect with each other, whether it's in the same region, but also possibilities of communicating to home countries or to family who have perhaps refugee status in another country. So if we speak about Afghanistan, so many have contact with families who are living in Iran, and so on. but no,
Yeah.
we don't have any direct.
Okay. No, but no, I mean the Red Cross would be a way to help those excluded get access to or get some kind of status online, so to speak. I mean, help them get online, help them with.
Mhm.
I mean, it would be something to.
It's something to think about.
Yeah.
Yeah. What I'd like to add is also with Facebook. There was also a few comments for when we talk about participation and we talk about trust and so on. There were a few comments as a result of these workshops that we had, where women said, "Oh no, Facebook, their papers were being processed," and they were very skeptical about Facebook, about giving any information, very careful about their children using Facebook, because they were afraid that their processes, their refugee status would be rejected, that somebody would have access. And I find this is a very interesting point, because at first, perhaps my first reaction was, and this was a couple of years ago, was, oh, being paranoid. But actually, these things are happening. These things are happening where you have to be careful about.
Yeah, there's been instances like that in Sweden as well, where people saying with disability support from the government has actually been working and then writing about it on Facebook and then got caught that way. So.
I'm not talking about somebody who's. I'm talking about any information.
Yeah, of course.
Any information. You know, I mean, I think it could work both ways, but also people were in such precarious situations, and it's an awful, inhumane situation where asylum seekers have to go years without knowing what their status is. You know, and are very. I wouldn't say paranoid. It's not paranoid. It's being careful, and that's where we're coming back to e-governance is not just e-governance. It's Facebook. It's it's all this whole social web idea, where they don't want to endanger their processes being rejected, their papers being rejected. So whether for whichever reasons.
Thank you.
I would also add something, and I think it's very important in this context, really to think to question what means who is citizen. So I think it's a very good way of approaching, and the next step is to question. To question the idea of national state, the modern national state. It's quite connected with the concept of citizen. Who is citizen in which state? And this state and the borders and the creation, the imagination of a community, of a national community, and so on. And the next step is then to thinking about the organization of this imagined community, this imagined homogeneous community, and the structures and the economical structure. There is no possibility of, as from our point of view in Maiz, there is no way of discussing these issues without question capitalism, without criticizing the exclusion structures, because the exclusion structures here in internet, doesn't matter what they are. As you said, they are reproduced, and we may not forget that there are a lot of of context and as you said about work possibility, but not only it's bigger. Just to think about capitalism. What has capitalism with idea of citizenship to do? What has national state with this idea? And how can we talk about democracy as a possibility and internet or digital era without talking about everything with around and supporting is. I think it must be, the discussion must go also in this direction.
There's not really anything to gain to avoid discussing it, besides discussing the bigger problem or criticizing it. The only ones that gain anything on it are the ones we're supposed to criticize. No, sorry. Yeah, I was just agreeing, saying that there's no real point in not criticizing or making the sitting governments or the systems we're about to trust or supposed to trust. The only ones that gain anything upon that are the ones we want to criticize. So I think...
Es bringt nichts, so praktisch, es bringt nichts, wenn man das nicht kritisiert. Das ist, also ist in... Genau, es bringt nichts, das nicht zu thematisieren. Ja, klar. Ja, es ist einfach.
I believe that as long as we have the biggest ethnical group in a country seeing themselves as primary right holders to geographical locations resources, we will always have some kind of racism in our structure. I have some kind of utopia where a citizenship is defined anyone who lives, works, or studies in a geographical location should be able to change their, I don't know, circumstances. I think it's possible, but we have a long way to go.
Ich muss. Yeah, okay. My arm is not long enough. Oh.
From.
It's because I haven't had access to these technologies, you know? Yeah, I think you're right, it's a utopia. But in the meantime, that's why my closing statement was, perhaps we can rethink the way that we exclude. Yeah. So perhaps just with this question alone, how am I excluding anybody from this program that I think is so great? And how can we create new structures or break down old structures to allow for more or perhaps better qualitative inclusion? Yeah?
And transformation.
That's right. No, that's right. That's what I meant by breaking down perhaps breaking down old structures, because as long as we maintain the status quo, somebody will always be excluded. So somebody else will will get a better status, but there will somebody always be excluded, and perhaps more marginalized. So the idea is perhaps, even, like you said, a utopia, where...
But just because we call it a utopia doesn't mean we shouldn't fight for it.
Exactly, but to work towards, to question, to criticize, to perhaps think on a higher level. Yeah?
I had a question here about, you were talking about people being excluded from sort of access to the state or the resources of the state, services of the state and so on. And then, of course, there are also informal support systems that usually take the place of this. So family-based or based on other social relations or based on neighborhood relations, things like that. So I was just wondering, in the context of your work, with the people you work with, how do you see this impacted also by digital technologies? So informal support structures, when the usual support structures from the state is not available, either financial support structures or, you know, do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Support structures, if we're just talking about financial, I think
Yeah, or other, I mean, the things you usually see with sort of family relationships, or maybe on a neighborhood basis of just sort of helping out with life, where the state is not able to help, sort of.
I would like to reword that, and I
Yeah.
think where the state is not able, I would cross that out, and where the state is not willing
Yeah.
to support certain segments of society,
I accept
to
the change.
include certain segments of the society. That's I think so our organization, what we do is not just a matter of trying to give, so we don't give financial services, we don't provide, but what we try to do is create space for discussion, for rethinking, for creating strategies, give space that we can create new ideas and perhaps develop ideas as a collective. So it's not, of course, is the idea of everybody has their individual needs, but how can we organize as well on a collective level?
I mean, I'm thinking of various things like, for example, let's say childcare. It's something that in many European countries has, for the majority, been taken over by the state, like childcare, where parents are not there, so kindergartens or whatever. But I mean, for people who don't have access to that, it's either sort of family or neighborhood based, and I mean, these things are taken over by sort of social relations. So I just wonder if you see some, like, with relation to digital technologies and these kind of things in your work.
Die Frage ist eben so praktisch die Alternative, genauso das Community. Ja? So wie so das Alternativ, wenn nicht von der Regierung etwas zur Verfügung gestellt wird, wie organisieren sich die Leute, also marginalisierte Gruppen, eben im Kontext von ICTs. Da würde ich eben sagen, wenn ich denke an die freie Szene.
Beispiel Zapatisten ohne Internet, ohne die ganze Technologie wäre nicht möglich. Aber der Widerstand von Zapatisten, weil sie wurde auch international, die große Unterstützung für alles.
Wir sprechen im
Also es gibt die Lokale und dann über Internet aus eine Plattform für Allianzen.
Aber das ist von der Praxis her die beste Beispiele sind die Zapatisten. Das wird auch vom Forschen ohne die ganzen Unterstützung über Internet vor 20 Jahren und bis heutzutage ist nicht möglich, diese Widerstandsbewegung. Das hat eine unglaublich wichtige Rolle. Praxisorientierte
Widerstandsbewegung in die letzte Zeit sehr wie Social Media.
Okay, we're coming back to building of alliances, but also within. It wouldn't have been possible without the internet. How the Zapatistas organized wouldn't have been possible in the last 20 years to that extent without the internet. And we see it many other social movements that are not possible. We see also how the government reacts when people. Ja, eben, das ist, was ich wollte gerade sagen. Ja? Aber
Could not be possible because it would mean that before there was no.
Okay, ja.
In this dimension, this form that we know today.
Okay, aber wenn wir sagen, das im Kontext von Österreich, von Linz, was könnten wir dann als Beispiel dann im Sinne von, so da würde ich eben sagen, so wie kleine Projekten, die eben mit dem freien Sender.
Aber
Also
Dorf-TV.
eben, das wollte ich hier genau
Dorf-TV
sagen.
ist
Ja,
auch eine-
genau. Yeah, I think the meeting in Austria, I made a presentation about network building from Maiz, and we many examples were how we've created as we're an autonomous organization. We're not associated with any government, extremely critical, and so on. And so we're not represented by any government party or anything. We do get funding, though, and how we try to increase participation in media is basically we've infiltrated. Now, what we use is we use different channels of different communication channels. Where we're talking about independent community television, independent community radio, where the listener is the user, is the user and the producer actually. Servus, wie ist es Servus? So it's a service provider, independent service provider. Perhaps some people from Conservas might know about Servus in Linz. And so in that way we've tried to build a network where another voice beyond the mainstream voice can be heard. So critical, anti-racist, feminist perspectives are generated through these channels of media, whether we're talking about old media or new media, which is actually new media is, or old media is also a channel, new media is also a channel of the old media in terms of the radio program, user-generated radio programs are then restreamed and so on. So in terms of that, we produce also a migrant magazine on a regular basis. Yeah. Migrazine, das ist eben so, was ich habe it's on our project website, and it's called Network Building, and it is quite a few links actually to the different channels that we use in terms of bringing our perspectives to the forefront.